Hello, Nate.
Hello, Greg. Hello, Internet. We are excited to be here once again for another episode of the ABA's What's This Bird Live, where we talk about bird identification, birding in general, whatever y'all want to talk about. It's live. You can throw us any sort of prompt and we will run with it. Greg, what have we got today? How's birding in your neck of the woods? It is abnormally warm and wet here where I am, which has been sort of par for the course this winter.
It's you know what I think that's par for the course for a lot of the ABA area, at least the lower 48.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, holy mackerel, what's been happening out in California? The weather they've been getting is just ridiculous. For us, I mean, I don't know. This is kind of like turning into normal February, where we got crocuses and snowdrops blooming, and the maple trees all started blooming. The allergies are going.
Oh
Robins are
man,
on
we weren't there
territory in
yet.
mid-April or mid February.
Yeah,
Um, but I think this is, we got Southern Illinois got its first purple martin scouts today,
get out of town. That's
if you
usually
can
like
believe
a
that.
southeast thing. That's well, Southern Illinois is pretty much the southeast in all for all intents and purposes, but seems awfully early for purple
It
martins. But
is.
I
It's
guess
2 weeks. It's
they
at
will
least
come
two
back.
weeks early.
Yeah, that's
Um,
something.
but yeah, that's just that's the new norm. I mean, all those people who said they'd never move to Chicago or the Great Lakes because of the winters. Well, guess what?
You don't have to worry about it anymore.
Hey, you don't have to worry about that anymore. so what's going?
Yeah,
So what's been happening by you?
not a lot. I've been chasing this pair of short-eared owls in my county for like twice, three times in the last couple weeks. They've been present at this kind of empty farm fields that has become one of the hottest birding locations in my county. And I've seen short-eared owls in my state, obviously, but for the county, it's a pretty good bird. There are a pair of them that show up pretty much every day when people go out to see them at sun up and sundown. But unfortunately, I have kids and school that I have to get them ready for. So sun up and sundown is like the absolute worst possible time for me to go out and try and find these birds. They have been coming out sometimes later in the morning, so I've been driving out every once in a while to try and catch them. I just have not been lucky yet. And of course, I'm taunted by the eBird needs alert every single day by
Oh
people who
yeah,
are out there half an hour before, half an hour after I leave, finding these short-eared owls flying around. Go figure. So that's birding for you.
yeah. So hey, all of you guys out there, how this works is we are watching comments on Facebook and YouTube. And if you've got something to say, you want to ask us a question or just want to say hello, Mia's here. Hi, Mia.
Hey,
Um,
Mia, good to see you.
yeah, so just chime in the comments, and we'll get to it as best we can.
Yeah, we have some.
We've got a bunch of stuff to
Oh,
talk about.
Joshua Sims in the comments on YouTube is my buddy from down in Raleigh. At least I'm pretty sure he's still in Raleigh.
Oh, right
Yeah,
on.
you've been meaning to make the trip for those owls. Yeah, they're there, but I mean, it's at the worst pot. You know how sometimes there's a spot in the county that like it's not a huge county, but like it's the farthest possible point away from where I live in the county, and so it's kind of a pain to get out there. That's where these birds are. So yeah, so be it. So be it.
Yeah, we've got a couple of farm fields near Chicago that have anywhere from two to half a dozen short-eared owls
Yeah.
that put on a display every night at sunset. And there's a couple of harriers out there, and people have been getting all these
Oh, I saw the Harriers. I've
pictures of
seen
the
the
harriers
Harriers.
trying to
Yeah.
rob the owls, and owls trying to rob owls,
Yeah.
and um,
It
it's
would not
it's a
surprise me if these birds were annual and they were coming back every single winter and coming to this spot because it's like it's an exceptional sort of spot for short-eared owls. You know the spot that short-eared owls like. It's kind of
oh yeah,
those overgrown weed fields, but not like overgrown in the sense that there's brushy vegetation, but like it's overgrown in the sense that there's all these long weeds that are just kind of lying down at all sorts of crisscross angles, and it's clear that there are thousands upon thousands of rodents in this area.
yep.
Um, and the owls and the harriers just absolutely love that stuff.
Well,
But
and that's a key to finding
good to know
short-eared
there.
owls. That's a
Yeah,
key, is like go out during the day and look for harriers. And if you find a
yeah,
field where there's a bunch of harriers, go out
yep.
at sunset,
Go at sundown. Yep, and there's
and
probably
you'll
going to
see the
be
short-eared
owls
owls,
around.
because they really are in a lot of the winter habitat. They at least in the northern states in Canada. They really are sort of the day shift and the night shift.
Yeah, yeah. It's a similar sort of dynamic with red-shouldered hawks and barred owls around here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and here too.
Yeah, everywhere,
Donna
everywhere with
Rose
our
on
yeah.
Facebook says hi.
Yeah, Andrew
And
Kambauer from DC, Elizabeth Alden from Northern Vermont, Brandt Schoenberg from Cincinnati, KP. There's so many people. Birding AP Benson, greetings from the Hamptons. Eamon from British Columbia. Thanks for joining us. We're excited to chat birds with you. I have to leave a little bit early because I'm scheduled right up to a recording session for a podcast right at the end of this. So we're gonna cut out about 5 minutes early, just giving you the heads up. So Greg, maybe that means that we should move right into the bird discussion. Let's talk birds and bird ID.
well, before we do that, let's just remind people. Let's just remind people that we've got a couple of really great tours coming up. We've got Belize in March and Hawaii in April, and if either one of these locations, birding destinations, trips your trigger, I suggest you check it out at aba.org/travel. Our tours are really excellent. I say that not as someone who works for the ABA, but Katinka does an amazing job putting these tours together and really getting all the birds you want to see when you go to these destinations. Especially like the Agami heron. That's
Rachel Brenner on YouTube says, Greg, it looks like you're feeling better than 2 weeks ago. Is that true?
Yeah, we were just talking about that. Thank you, Rachel. It looks like I'm destined for Paxlovid rebound, as my wife just tested positive yesterday, and I'm starting to feel it, I think, a little bit. So, but we'll see. But thank you for remembering.
When it was in my house 2 weeks ago, so I'm still good.
Thank you for remembering. All right, so our first bird comes from Wisconsin. I think we can cut right to the chase with this one. It's a little bird on the branches, and it's got a really big, thick, conical bill. That's going to take us right to the sparrows and finches and things like that.
Yeah, that's a big old bill on that bird, Greg, and I think it's also noteworthy. I usually think of sparrows as mostly sort of ground birds. So when we get photos of sparrows in What's This Bird and elsewhere, you usually see them at eye level or below. Whenever you see one of these birds with a big conical bill that is above you, there's a good chance that that's going to be a finch. And also, that deeply forked tail is sort of a classic finch trait. I don't know. There are some sparrows that have kind of shallowly forked tails. Savannah sparrow springs to mind. But most of the sparrows do not have a tail as deeply forked as this bird. So I think we're pretty safely in the finch area, which is nice because there are fewer finches. In North
that's
America
true, and there is one, and that's a juvenile brown-headed cowbird. Has a big, hefty, blackish bill like this. It's also kind of chunky like this bird, but it's chunky. Nowhere.
This bird has,
but it's nowhere near as heavily patterned. And they have a very noticeable white throat. So they're just kind of gray all over with a whitish throat and not a whole lot of pattern, maybe a little bit of soft streaking, and they really don't show this deeply notched tail like this, which is an important field mark for this bird.
So nice thing about finches, we've only got really 3 in this kind of streaky brownish mold. The used to be called the Carpodocus finches. They were split not all that long ago. I think the genus is Hemorrhaeus now. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that one. But there are sort of 3 finches here in North America: Cassins, purple, and house finch. In Wisconsin, Cassins would be extremely unlikely. That is primarily a finch.
I think there's one record.
West. Yeah, and it is not a bird that shows a ton of vagrancy just generally, although they do kind of show up. So I think we're pretty safe in putting this one in the purple versus house.
But if we didn't have, and you're right. Status and distribution is as important as anything else. So, Wisconsin, it's not going to be a Cassins finch. However, like I said, I believe there has been a record. There are extraliminal records of Cassins finch.
Yeah.
We
Especially in
can
the Everglades.
eliminate Cassin's finch because of the view we get here. The undertail coverts and flanks, there's no streaking down there. The bird is just
Hmm.
plain. Cassin's finch usually shows some streaking on the undertail coverts, and it's
Hmm.
much finer streaking.
Much finer,
And the
kind of like the
overall
song versus
streaking,
Lincoln's. Yeah.
it doesn't look like it's drawn with a pastel. It looks like it's drawn
Hmm.
with a pencil. And the bill is
The
longer and
bill,
thinner, and
very
it's really,
thin, very long. Yep.
yeah, it's kind of a unique shape.
Yeah,
That
it's like a pine cone pruning bill. If I remember,
exactly.
they do a lot of like sticking that bill into the between the pine needles and prying them apart. Not to say that purple finches can't do it. It's just that
Yeah, I mean,
Cassin's finches are especially good at it.
in a few tens of thousands of years, well, they might have crossed bills. Um,
Yeah, maybe,
so
maybe.
so really so
Not
really,
get
as
ahead of
Nate
ourselves.
said, it's down to two: house finch and purple finch, and this is a very common birding conundrum, challenge, whatever you want to call it. Um, and so I've got our purple finch, which is what the bird is, flanked
Hmm.
here by a couple different house finches. And yeah, the one on the right I included because it's kind of puffed up.
Hmm.
Um, and then the one on the left is more of how I think of house finch.
Yeah.
Although birds have feathers and they can do all kinds of things with them. Um, Purple finch, just overall, it's a heavier, chunkier bird.
Hmm.
Um, House finch is slimmer, longer. You'll notice the difference in the bill shape. The house
Hmm.
finch has that curved culmen. That's the top ridge of the bill, has a gentle curve to it, and the bill just isn't. It's not as heavy.
Hmm.
Um, it just it's definitely these bills are similar, but you look at them closely, they're not the same.
Yeah, the
Um,
way I always think about it is that when you look at a house finch, it's almost that curved culmen almost gives the impression that the bill is a little bit blunt.
uh-huh.
It's a little bit shorter and not as sharp. Where the angle is not doing us any favors on this purple finch, but if you see a purple finch sort of at eye level, the bill looks very sharp, and they've got that straight Kerman. It's Coleman. It's like a little triangle, like a
Yeah.
little perfect equilateral triangle, and it looks the bill itself just gives a kind of a heavier and sharper and longer impression. Even though the actual sizes of the bills are not all that much, it's just sort of the impression that you get when looking at that bird in profile.
Right. And in the comments on Facebook, Chris Sloan, hi Chris, says he finds the forked tail to be much more obvious on purple finch in the
Hmm.
field. And yes, that's the next thing we're going to is look at the notched tail on that purple
Yeah.
finch, and how the tail on purple finch is shorter and more deeply notched. The longer tail and shorter wings of house finch give it again a longer, slimmer,
Hmm.
overall leaner appearance.
Yeah, and house finches always, to me, look a little bit disheveled too. Like they
They
always
do.
look a little bit messier, and I don't know whether that's even like when they're perfectly like brand new feathers molted. Like they always look very kind of messy to me. Whereas purple finches always kind of look very put together, and that's just an impression. That's not something that you can take to the bank with every single individual bird, but that's just kind of my general impression of these birds. And also, I think that when you point out that tail. The impression that tail gives is that it's also for the purple finch. I mean,
Yeah.
is also that the base is extremely narrow too and kind of flares out a little bit. It looks
Mm-hmm.
very like thin waisted, and I know that's not the bird's waist. Do birds even have
Yeah.
waists? I'm not even sure, but it gives that sort of thin waisted impression that gives it a very unique profile that is different for purple finch and house finch. Like if you're looking at a finch that's sitting up at the top of a tree, and you can't really get any impression of the pattern or the color or anything like that because it's backlit or whatever. You do get that impression of a very slim waist, very big head, chunky bill. That is more often like, a purple finch thing than a house finch thing, at
And
least in my eyes.
crossbills sitting up in the tops of trees appear the same way,
Mm-hmm.
with that
Mm-hmm.
even shorter tail, but that same like notched kind of little bit
Yeah.
flaring. Um, yeah. So, and last thing is the face pattern. I mean, even at this
Mm-hmm.
angle and in harsh light, we can
Look at it.
see the face pattern of a purple finch, which is sort of a dark mask with a pale malar and a pale supercilium, which the house finch just never shows. I mean, it just
We're
always
getting
has plain
yes, I
face.
agree. And we're getting called on our East Coast bias here, Greg, in the comments and YouTube, and rightly so. Birding Your Best Life notes out that from a West Coast perspective, local purple finches do have a streaked undertail covert as well.
Do they really?
I grab my book. I'm not. I don't. I believe. I believe you.
I didn't. I mean, I lived in Colorado for a while, and that field mark held in Colorado. But on the West Coast, there is. But there are. But there are.
There on the coast.
There is a different subspecies of purple finch on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're cool. They're very richly colored too. They're a neat looking bird. You can move on. I'm just flipping through my Sibley here for my own edification.
So this one comes to us from Jeffersonville, Indiana.
It's not a finch.
And this is definitely not a finch.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, it's the Pacific subspecies.
The Pacific
Thank
subspecies.
You,
well,
oh, it's Alvaro. Of course, it's Al. Birding Your Best Life is Alvaro Jaramillo. I should have known that. I knew that.
Yeah.
Hey, Al.
Well, and and that is one of the things I love most about birding is even after
Really
doing
West
this
Coast,
for 50 years, you can still learn something. It's just that I'm sure at some point in my life I saw that, but it never stuck, and that's a new thing to me.
I've seen the interior West purple finches. I've not seen the coastal purple finches, or at least I have not paid close attention to them.
If I had seen West Coast purple finches, it would have been in the 1970s. Actually, no, a little bit later.
Everyone
anyway.
was on the West Coast then. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we're so this bird from Jeffersonville, Indiana, is definitely a duck. It's swimming and it's got a big old monster bill. And looking at that bill, really, this can only be one thing. But in the comments, people were saying that maybe this was a hybrid between a northern shoveler, which is our only duck that has a bill like this. So I mean, you go through your field.
Shovelers elsewhere in the world, but for us in the northern hemisphere, I can't even say North America. It's northern hemisphere. Northern shoveler is found as a whole Arctic species, found all the way around the northern hemisphere.
Yeah. So they were commenting that this might be a northern shoveler blue-winged teal hybrid. So some obvious northern shoveler field marks that we see here are, of course, the bill and the white tail, and also that kind of weird patterning on the flank, which is also northern shoveler, but the white crescent on the face and overall it looks weird. But Sibley in the app and in the latest edition of the Sibley Guide does a good job of illustrating this plumage, and so what we're seeing is a shoveler that's in transitional plumage, maybe a little bit later than usual, depending on this bird's age and circumstances.
Yeah, not uncommon.
But this is a fairly common thing you see in the winter is shovelers that look like this as they're transitioning to breeding plumage. And,
it's important to note, I think, that teal is one of those taxonomically useless terms. We always sort of apply it to small dabbling ducks, but the birds that we call teal, in particular green-winged teal, are not very closely related to the other teal, being the blue-winged teal and the cinnamon teal. And the closest relative of the blue-winged teal and the cinnamon teal is, in fact, northern shoveler. So it makes sense that the northern shoveler, which is technically, I guess you could call it a teal if you wanted to throw that in there. I mean, these names don't really have much of a
shoveling
meaning.
teal.
Shoveling teal, yeah. And they're going to share a few kind of subtle plumage characteristics in that case. Obviously, we know about blue-winged teal and cinnamon teal, which can be, the males are quite easy to tell apart, but the females can be very difficult. But northern shoveler can be very teal-ish. And Christy Esmahan says in the comments, aren't blue-winged teals very small? They are small. They're small ducks, but I wouldn't say they're very small. I would say Green-winged teal is very small. Blue-winged teal
Mm-hmm.
is small-ish. Is smaller than certainly like mallard, black duck, which are the big dabbling ducks, but even smaller than things like pintail or gadwall or widgeon.
Yeah. Now, I mean,
But
if this were a hybrid, um, I would expect the bill. I mean, hybrids can look like anything, but I would expect the build not to be quite so perfectly shovelerish. Um,
yeah,
but also, I would expect to see
blue-winged teal and cinnamon teal do have big bills for
they
their
do, but
size,
not
but
like this.
they're not like this. No.
Not like this. And I would also expect to see some a little bit of blue wing teal plumage on here somewhere, maybe some speckling or spotting or
Yeah.
but again, if you look at the Sibley illustration, especially the one on the top there, he gets the flank pattern, the chest pattern, everything.
Those kind of
And
cool
this
chevrons.
bird is just a northern, not just, but is a northern shoveler.
Has there ever been a documented hybrid of blue-winged teal and northern shoveler? I have no idea.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What
Yeah,
would
there
that look like?
definitely
I guess it
has.
would be kind of a tweener with regards to the bill.
They are. They are, yeah. Okay, next up, this comes from Sax Zim Bog in Minnesota.
Way up in northern Minnesota.
Way up there. And so the person who posted this photo asked if the bird flying in on the left is a hoary redpoll. And so we can get straight past all the other finches and all of that stuff, because really a cluster of birds like this with little red caps and yellow bills and little black chin spots, we don't have anything else that looks like that. It's
Nope. The
they're
pole
red
is the
poles.
top of the head. That is the pole.
Yeah.
I guess is referring to that. The top of the globe is a pole, but it's spelled differently. So we have a few polled birds: red pole, black pole, warbler.
Yep.
Pole birds. I can't think off the top of my head, but I'm going to let you take the lead on this one, Greg, because I do not see hoary redpoll at all down where I live in the southeast. And in fact, the one time thought I saw a hoary redpoll was a very pale bird that I saw in Alaska several years ago. I was told by a more experienced birder from the area that it was not, in fact, hoary enough. Assuming that I guess we have to assume these birds are still split for the time being. They're still two separate species, though that may not be the case for for much longer. Who knows?
Yeah, and and that's
I don't know. I can't tell. I'm struck by how pale that bird looks, but I know that is not always enough.
well, I think, and I would say without any hesitation, seeing what we see here, that bird is definitely pale enough.
Okay.
Because we can see the rump and the undertail coverts very, very clearly. It has a clean white rump and it has clean white undertail coverts, and the bird is just so pale that as long as hoary redpoll exists as a species, I think we can safely call this one. We can call this one a hoary redpoll. And here's another picture of it at the feeder, so you can see the difference in just how much paler it is from all the other redpolls. Also,
Sure,
it's got
does
that.
Not have much on the face. Yeah.
It's got that smaller bill. The bill almost looks like it's broken in half. That's one thing. The hoary redpolls, at least some of them, the upper mandible just seems smaller, like it's almost cut off or broken. But we're going to get into the weeds here a little bit, because as Nate was just saying, a birder in Alaska, I'm assuming one of the guides, maybe not,
It was.
said, okay, that's not hoary enough for me. And
Yeah. So you're saying that I should go
is-
back and once they're lumped, it's not going to matter. Here I am, commiserating about a bird identification from like 10 years ago. But Al says in the comments on YouTube that they're going to be lumped. Maybe he has
Well, I mean, then we won't have to worry about it. But
the
it'll still be
evidence
fun
looks pretty good.
It'll still be fun to pick them apart, regardless. It's one of my favorite birds.
Y'all
Are
northern
red
birders
poles.
need something to do in the deep winter anyway.
Absolutely. So here these are some red poles that I've
Some red
photographed over
poles.
the years. And I've been lucky to be able to spend a lot of time with red poles and some hoary or hoary types. On the left here, we've got three birds feeding under some birch trees in the Chicago area. The one on top is definitely common redpoll. It's got that brownish back, those big blurry streaks on the flanks. You can see some streaking on the undertail coverts. No question, that's a common redpoll. The bird in the middle, it's a common redpoll. It's got those heavy streaks on the flanks. We can't see the undertail coverts, but it's paler. And these birds just lined up for me like this while they were feeding. So I was really, really lucky to get them doing this. But the bird on the bottom, we determined was a hoary redpoll. It has much crisper streaking on the flank. It's got the pale overall back, a very pale face. We got another view of it where it had a much smaller bill. It had a clean white rump and white undertail coverts. Now, looking at these three birds, you'll also notice how the bird on the top has a brown back with two white stripes down the center. And
That's what the ones
also,
that we get down. We get red poles down here every once in a while, every few years, and they tend to be the very darky brown ones. Like there's no question, but not that a hoary red pole would ever show up in North Carolina, or the Southeast in general. But we tend to get the darker on the darker end of the spectrum than the paler ones. Like we don't even get any questionable ones. It's just all dark birds.
yeah, and that's where you see that brown back with the white stripes down the middle of the back. That's usually a common redpoll. But as we see on the right here, this three pictures of the same bird. Boy, it's got a dark back with obvious white stripes, every bit as dark as any common redpoll I've ever seen. But look at those streak flanks. I mean, they're almost non-existent. It's got that nice, yeah. It's got that nice little butternut colored wash to the face, which is another hoary redpoll feature. It's got a very small bill. And in the middle picture, we can see that the rump is clean white. And then in the third picture, we can see that the undertail coverts are virtually unmarked. But I mean, the thing with, redpolls, again, looking at those three birds on the left, there are birds that are in the middle that you're just going to throw your hands up and say, I don't know what to do with this bird.
Hence the lump.
Yes. But now here's the thing though, there are other birds that are still considered, good species like cackling goose and Canada goose. And you'll get cackling goose, the largest subspecies of cackling goose and the smallest subspecies of lesser Canada, which is lesser Canada goose. And you'll get those birds in a flock of white-cheeked geese, and you're like, I don't know which one this is. And and that's okay.
The idea of what is a species and what is not a species. I think when you start birding, you kind of get the impression that this stuff is all relatively cut and dried. But as you become a more experienced birder, or as you do it more often, you realize that a lot of these barriers between species, or what we consider species, are a lot grayer than you might have imagined. And of course, it's in the margins that some people really enjoy playing around with them anyway.
And also there's other factors, which is a lot of the color of a bird's, especially a bird like a finch, a lot of that, the richness of their color comes from the fringing on the outer edges of the contour feathers, and
which wears off
as they age, between molts. That wears off and it changes the color and tone of the bird. And so, there's another factor in there that, a freshly molted, that bird in the middle freshly molted might look different than it might have molted earlier. Who knows? I think they're all at the same stage in this particular picture, and that just shows the variation in common redpolls. But
I assume that if hoary redpoll is in fact lumped with common redpoll, then it would just remain common redpoll. Since there's a European redpoll, lesser redpoll.
Sure.
So we'd still remain common redpoll. It wouldn't just become redpoll, capital R, capital P red
Yeah,
gold.
I believe that would be the case. Okay, back to Indiana for this one.
Have you seen the Eagles, Greg?
I
Have you
have
seen the
seen the
Eagles?
Eagles, Nate. I have seen the Eagles.
Get them in that camera lens a year. Strap your hold across your shoulder.
And this, yeah, I mean, this is a bird that is found all across the ABA
Well,
area.
you're giving away. I guess both eagles are found all the way across the ABA
They
area,
are.
though they are. Yeah, the one is less common in the east than the other. Well, no, that there are golden eagles that breed in Quebec and come down into the southeast with some regular
Yeah,
days. So both
yeah.
eagles, both eagles,
Um,
both
but
eagles.
The what we're the eagle thing here we get. Look at these big planked wings with a
They're
whole
broad.
big
Yeah.
broad wings that look like a plank. With a lot of fingers, big rounded
Yeah.
wings.
Long wings compared to the tail, so you know it's not a
Yeah,
buteo.
exactly.
Yeah.
And a white tail with a dark terminal band. Now, and we see some white under the wings. Now, our two eagles can look like this in immature plumage.
Mhm.
And
We are cursed with two species of eagles, both of which can have brown heads, both of which can have white in the tails.
yes. So let's take a look at those two. And we'll see that the bird in question is a bald eagle. And the reason for that, the field marks here. Look at the terminal band on the golden eagle. It's much thicker. It's
Broad.
much heavier. It's much more well defined. The bald eagle is variable and can look like that, but never really that crisp and well defined. Also, look at where the white is on the undersides of the wings. The white patches on a golden eagle are at the base of the inner primaries and the adjacent secondaries. And it's sort of like these two like white running lights underneath the wings. Whereas bald eagle is more blotchy and is blotchy
Scattered.
across the
Yeah,
wing
messy.
coverts,
Yep.
which a golden eagle it really never shows white, at least anywhere near that amount in the wing coverts.
So people are perhaps curious what we mean by coverts. So when you're looking at the wing of a bird like that, like the bald eagle versus the golden eagle, the coverts are the small feathers that are sort of on the arm, and the other feathers on the bird's wing are the flight feathers, the primaries and the secondaries. And you can see actually really well in that nice photo of the golden eagle is that the white is actually at the base of those outer secondary feathers and not on the kind of short feathers that are attached to the arm there, those the coverts. So the white is
Yep.
on the secondaries, on the flight feathers, whereas in the bald eagle, the white is kind of scattered evenly across those kind of small, messy feathers that are immediately on the underside of the wing.
Yep. And a couple of other things. Golden eagle tends to appear, it has a little bit of a longer tail, and the wings show a little bit more of a belly. The secondaries are a little bit
that deepness
longer.
of the secondaries. Yeah.
Yeah. And Alex Chris Chisnall on Facebook says, I have noticed, but not sure if diagnostic, that golden eagle hold their wings in a bit of a dihedral compared to bald,
That's
which
accurate.
hold their wings flat. Now, remember I said plank. That is useful. And dihedral means that the wings are held in a slight V. And
Yeah,
one
in
thing
fact, golden eagle does give the impression of, especially at a distance, of a turkey vulture.
well, that's
as opposed
exactly
to
where I
bald
was
eagle.
going.
Yeah, they have a smaller head than bald eagle, so it kind of disappears into the body at a distance, and they do kind of hold their wings in a slight dihedral, like you were kind of, we see frequently in turkey vulture, probably the most common raptor that people encounter regularly across the continent.
Yeah,
So
and
golden eagle can look like a white-tailed turkey vulture.
yes, and when Ted Floyd sat in for you one time, we were talking about that he said, where he lives on the Front Range in Colorado, during raptor flights, turkey vulture and golden eagle are the confusing pair.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
So
It's one
yeah,
of it's like Downy versus hairy woodpecker almost. Everyone is trying very hard to tell a hairy woodpecker from a downy, and frequently, if you're curious about it, it's probably a downy. When you do see a hairy woodpecker, the larger size, the larger body, the big old bill stands out. It's the same with bald eagle and golden eagle. When people are trying to make these young bald eagles into a golden eagle, which happens from frequently, not uncommon identification challenge. When you do see a golden eagle, it really does stand out how different they are and how much they do look like a turkey vulture and fly like a turkey vulture, as opposed to bald eagle, which is just a big old blocky plank of a bird with big old flat wings.
Gavin asks, what differentiates bald eagle in this plumage from white-tailed eagle? Well, that's I've only
Al,
seen one.
you got that Al on YouTube. You got a insight into
I've
that one.
seen I've
I know
seen
it was just
one
in
I've
Japan.
seen one white-tailed eagle, and in this in this plumage actually, or close to it,
Mm-hmm.
um, up on St. Paul. The thing that stuck out to me about the white-tailed eagle was how just massive the wings are, just with a
Oh, bigger than bald,
super
huh?
super deep belly,
Hmm.
broad, massive, long wings, and the tail is longer and it's got a bit more of a wedge shape to it,
Hmm.
rather than more of a buteo-like shape. Although we see this bald eagle here has a bit of a wedge shaped tail, but the but the tail is it's a different shape, and just the overall impression of that bird is, I mean, if you saw one fly over, you're used to seeing bald eagle, you'd be like, okay, what the heck is that?
So it's
Because
different. That's something different.
that's different. Um,
Uh, Angela Gerand in the YouTube comments notes the projection of the head in the bald eagle seems a little misleading in this picture. I think that's a quality of image
yes.
problem. I think that it's a little bit of a soft image, so we're losing the edges of that bird. Generally speaking, bald eagle looks like it has a very large head. It could also be that that bird is looking directly down at the person taking the photo too.
Yeah, and
I don't
and
really see the bill.
one thing also, when these birds are high up and especially against the clouds, you get a bald eagle that is transitioning in plumage like this one is, and the head's starting to get white and
Oh
the throat
yeah.
is white.
Sometimes you lose the white if the photo
You
is not
lose the
clear.
bird's
Yeah.
head in the cloud. It just
Yeah.
it's so when you can see the size of the bill and the extension of the head, that's a really good field mark. But sometimes you just can't make it out when they're soaring really high up.
All right.
Um,
Alvarez says whitetail is short-tailed, bit more of a wedge tail, as you note. Broad and big wings. Tail is shorter, not longer. That may have just been a brain slip
yeah,
from
it may. I mean, my memory. I'm not looking at a field guide, but my memory of it, and maybe it was because it's more wedge shaped. It just seemed
Yeah.
like the tail was longer. But the thing that really stuck out to me about that white-tailed eagle, and in pictures of them after the fact, because they have been seen in the Midwest. Actually, there is at least one record. So you always got to be on the
I
watch
didn't know
out
that.
for them, for any kind of vagrant at a hawk watch. Is just how the wing shape is just unlike any bird that we have in North America, really. Okay, we're going to go out west a bit to Colorado, and we've got down here at the bottom. We have an
Oh yeah.
obvious finch,
Couple finches.
given a little bit of a photo bomb, and we can tell, as we discussed earlier by the curved culmen, that that's a house finch, and
Indeed.
the person who posted this picture asked if this was a lesser goldfinch or an American goldfinch.
Hmm. Yeah, well, they're both out there for
So
sure. I am there. I see a lot of American goldfinches, especially this time of year. They're quite common in weedy fields, in my neighborhood. And this bird just looks off for
yep,
American goldfinch to me. Some things that stand out to me is the extent of the yellow on the under parts. A lot of yellow on the front. It goes all the way down to the undertail covert, whereas an American goldfinch, I typically see a white undertail covert. And the American goldfinches, both males and females in this type of year, they don't tend to show as much difference between the front and the back, the dorsal and the ventral sides of the bird. So this would immediately stand out to me as something different from the American goldfinches that I see. That's a nice comparison there, Greg. Yeah,
Well,
look at those wings and yeah, not nearly as yellow, very yellow on the bird in question.
yeah, I mean the lesser goldfinch just tends to be a bit more muted. I believe that these are both males in similar plumage,
Mm-hmm.
just because we see some black coming in on the bird's head on the right, the lesser goldfinch.
And on the American goldfinch.
Right. And so, but in pretty much all plumages, the when you're looking at them like this, American goldfinch, as Nate said, it's white. The flanks and the undertail coverts are white. Um, as you go further up the belly and breast, it can get really variable. It can be really tan and almost greenish looking, never
Mm-hmm.
quite as yellow as a lesser goldfinch. Um, the wing panel on a lesser goldfinch, it can, depending on where the bird is in its molt, um, it can get as bold as an American goldfinch, but typically when you see them in this kind of plumage, it's not the boldest thing on the wing is
Yeah.
that white base of the primaries.
Yeah, the
And if
American goldfinch has a very bold wing pattern just in all plumages. I mean,
yeah,
molts the wings once a year, and it's the same pattern in the bright, colorful males that you see in the spring and summer as it is in the winter birds, and that's always going to be there, and it's always going to be just that really well defined pied look in these
yep.
birds.
And of course, if you see them together, and it's sort of a little bit apparent in this comparison, lesser goldfinch is smaller and
Yeah, it
slimmer.
really is the lesser goldfinch.
And
Yep.
yeah, when you see them together, lesser goldfinch will stand out as a smaller, slimmer bird.
Yeah, it's a bird to watch out for in the east. I know, not to make this an East Coast bias thing, but it is a bird that shows a fair bit of vagrancy across the east. They show up this time of year
Yeah,
in the late winter. From
only
we
only
have
in
them
recent
we have them in the southeast. Yeah.
only in recent years, it seems, because I mean, traditional knowledge, at least in my neck of the woods, was lesser goldfinch does not vagrate. But in the last 10 years,
No.
that has proven not to be the case because they have shown
Yeah, it
up
makes
all
you
over
wonder
the
how much of
place.
that is just birds that have been sort of overlooked.
Yeah,
It's easy
I
to
think that
overlook those.
I think that there's a lot about.
It's going to show
So
up at a feeder. Someone who maybe not a birder, someone who doesn't recognize it as something that is altogether all that different from the goldfinches they're very familiar with. So
so uh sorry here. I'm trying to deal with Facebook while I'm doing this.
no,
Um,
everyone is very excited about another
the
accipiter
Yeah,
tutorial.
well, before we get to that, the first and only record of lesser goldfinch in Illinois was discovered in the hand at a banding station.
Oh, really?
It was
Huh.
coming to a feeder and wasn't recognized at the feeder until they had caught it. And um, anyways, so yes, it wouldn't be What's This Bird without an accipiter session. So here we go. And the Coopers versus sharp-shinned hawk debate that will never die. And the reason I picked this picture is because my wife, Erin, got extremely excited about this picture. She saw it on Facebook, and her office is at the other end of the house here back there, and she has windows looking out over the backyard, and she sees a lot of Cooper's hawks. They come sit on our fence right outside the window on a regular basis. So she saw this picture and she was so excited. She's like, "That's a sharp-shinned hawk. I got it right." And then I looked at the picture and I'm like,
Well, Greg, I am not too proud to admit that in my immediate pre scroll of the birds that you've chosen for us, which was like literally like 2 minutes before we went live, and I was like boop 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 boop. I got this one wrong because I didn't look closely at it.
Oh,
Wasn't
I
close enough at it because immediately the face gives you one impression, but if
yes.
you spend more than 5 seconds on it, you see that that doesn't quite extend to the entire bird, that impression.
Yes. And before we get to that, Gene Ellison asked, could we define the difference between a vagrant, a migrant, and an accidental? Well, I would say a migrant is a bird that migrates,
Semantics.
a
Semantics
migrant
corner.
that moves along a well-defined, understood uh, path from one region, usually breeding, to another. Um,
Yes.
Vagrant and accidental are basically, accidental is just a sub definition of vagrant. A vagrant is a
Yeah.
bird that is outside of its established, normal, understood range.
Yep.
Um, and accidental is sort of the
A
rarest of the
very rare
vagrants.
vagrant.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think like one record
Typically,
in
you'll
10 years.
see birders use terms like accidental, casual, rare as sort of a sliding scale of how, unusual a given sighting is. So accidental would be at the top, very few records. Casual would be, I don't know. People define these in all sorts of weird different ways. I always think of casual as like not an every year thing, but every 2 3 years sort of
Right.
thing. That's just my kind of armchair definition of casual. And then you've got rare, which in a birderly sort of rare bird sense is could be any of these birds, but I generally think of it as an unusual annual bird. Would be a rare bird, but again, you can talk to 5 different people and get 5 different definitions for a lot of these, but that's generally how they break down.
Yeah, Gavin Alvin points it out correctly in the Facebook comments if you're
Yeah,
watching there.
that's how I would.
And and
That's how
and
I
to
would.
sort
Rare,
of
then
like
casual, then
give
accidental.
you a real world example, um, Limpkin in Tennessee went from unknown to accidental to very rare to rare to casual to uncommon to probably breeding in the course of
Yeah,
like 3 years.
like 6 weeks. 6 weeks.
Yeah. Um, okay, so back to the urban goshawks. Um, so here we can see why this bird was confusing, because it is a petite male Cooper's
It's a
hawk.
petite.
Um,
It's a tweener.
it's a little guy, and compared here with a sharp-shinned hawk,
You can definitely
you
see.
can really see the difference here. I mean, the face alone, just forget about the rest of the bird, which is really almost identical in these two birds. And actually, this bird's the wear on the sharp-shinned hawk's tail feathers actually gives it more of a Cooperish look than the Cooper's hawk sitting right next to it.
Hmm.
But look at the face. These are both adult birds, pretty fresh
Yeah. So
plumage.
the expression is something you'll see that tossed around when people will
Yep.
try to identify these birds, and generally speaking, it's something that can be more or less. Here I am with all these equivocals. It can be pretty accurate. Whereas Cooper's hawks look mean, like they have a heavy brow and they have
Mm-hmm.
they kind of give an angry impression. Whereas sharp-shinned hawks look like you caught them doing something they shouldn't have been doing. They look surprised. It's because they don't have
And
quite the heavy brow. The eye looks bigger on the face.
well, the
than it
eye
does on
actually is
Cooper's, and so
bigger.
it
I
gives
believe. I
yeah.
believe that it actually is physically larger. Um,
And
and
so they
I
always kind of look
always,
a little bit startled. Yeah.
yeah, I always say sharp-shinned hawks look like startled parakeets.
Hmm.
And
And so when you look at this Cooper's hawk, I mean, now it's quite clear what it is. But when you first look at it, when you first glance at it, it does sort of give a kind of startled expression. The brow does not look especially heavy. The
yeah,
cap on the head looks very dark. But then you notice that the cap does stop at the neck. It's hard to tell with sometimes these photos because sometimes they can blow out parts of the bird. The image can be
absolutely.
blown out in some way that makes it look lighter than it actually is. But it's pretty clear that this bird has a gray nape and a relatively pale gray cheek, which are things that you do not see in the nice composite of a sharp-shinned hawk there. It's got a hood that goes all the way down to the mantle, to the back of the bird. And that's interesting. It's very orangey on the face. That seems especially orangey on the face, but I think generally
Yeah,
speaking.
but I mean, but they adult sharp-shinned hawks always show some amount of that orangey color in the face. It can vary, but it's always there to some degree. It can be extremely subtle and hard to see, especially when it's flying by at 1,000 miles an hour, or flushing the minute you turn to look at it after it's been sitting nicely teed up.
Yeah, that's another
But
thing
but
too.
the Cooper's hawk, the gray cheek, really, and that dark cap really, in this plumage at least, is always well defined and is a slam
Yeah.
dunk mark for this bird.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing that always kind of stands out for me for Coopers versus Sharpshinned is that generally speaking, Cooper's hawks can be very columnar. Like when they're perched on a branch or a wall or whatever, they're kind of the same width all the way from the shoulders all the way down to the feet. Whereas Sharpshinned hawks are kind of broadest in the chest. But that's obviously not the case with every Cooper's hawk. These smaller Cooper's hawks definitely do not look quite as big and chunky as a normal Cooper's hawk. These little males definitely do give a kind of Coopery impression. Though I will say that the Sharpshinned hawk even here looks more shouldery than the Cooper's hawk. The bird.
It does, and I think this bird was.
You see them side by side.
Yeah, this bird was perched and took notice of the photographer, and it's got its shoulders kind of like getting ready to take off.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the Cooper's hawk looks very settled in. It's got his breast feathers all fluffed up, and it's just kind of sitting there. And yeah, that's another thing too, which is, again, this is totally anecdotal, but at least around my neck of the woods, Cooper's hawks have become very almost tame, and they really pay very little attention to people. Whereas sharp-shinned hawks, they
still a little wary.
They tend to not be as bold as a Cooper's hawk does.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is that the Cooper's hawks that I see where I live are residents.
Yes.
They're non-migratory. They're
Same here.
birds. They know what to expect, and the sharp-shinned hawks are more migratory, and so I still see them. I mean, they breed in the southern Appalachians sometimes, but for the most part, the birds that I see around where I live are migrants. They breed further north. They only come down here briefly, and they're not they're not disabused of the hubbub that comes along with living in a suburban environment.
Yeah. So I think, Nate, we got you right on the money here.
Right.
And I think that is it. That is it for us.
We'll do the closing.
Yeah, want to thank you guys for joining us again today. And if you like what we do here, or listen to the best podcast that there is, as far as I'm concerned, the American Birding Podcast with our wonderful host Nate Swick.
Podcast.
Join the ABA and become part of the club. We would love to have you, and you would help support all of the things we do, our young birder programs, and on and on and on. And plus, you get a lot of really cool benefits, such as
we have a lot of stuff. Our magazines are fantastic. You get access to our
ABA
ID
community.
Vault. The community, the magazine archive. You can get all the ABA's birding magazines all the way back to the beginning of the organization. All that stuff is available for members. Please check that stuff out. If you're a member and you didn't know about it, please check it out. It's really cool.
Absolutely. And we'd hope to see you at Community, which now has thousands of members. And it's becoming a vibrant place to talk about birds without all the stuff that happens on Facebook and some other social media platforms, because it's all ours, and it's all about birds.
I feel like I'm being singled out there. Anyway, thanks everybody. We'll be back in a couple weeks. Go to sign up for flight calls if you want a heads up on when we're doing this, and we'll see you next time.
Alrighty. Bye.
Bye-bye.